Well, with your permission, I will say a few words, and you know, they often talk about having some tough acts to follow, and boy, you know, those are some very inspiring, moving, and amazing things that we've heard and seen tonight, and very humbling to come before you. And with your permission, again, I will say a few words. This conference this weekend is called the Los Angeles Housing and Hunger Crisis Conference, and it's an attempt to deal with those crises and figure out how we can unite our forces and come up with some solutions. And to do that, I think we have to understand what the causes of the problems are, and what the situation that the crises arise in is. And I think the first thing I need to talk about in speaking to you is the fact that I'm a person of European descent, and that's an element of what we're dealing with. And if I speak on these issues, I'm speaking essentially self-critically. We see the basis of this crisis of housing and of hunger is about the relationship of people to the land. And for me, as a European, this is not my land. We need to acknowledge this is stolen land. And this is the land of the indigenous people. This is a land on which other Europeans came and created a system of privatization. And unless we understand that the idea of putting the land in private hands is as bizarre as somebody owning the air or the water, we can't begin to deal with this problem. And so I need to acknowledge that in a self-critical way, that you know, this is a system, and a system of capitalism, a system of colonialism, a system of land tenure. I'm of Jewish descent. My father came here from Poland in the 1930s, but I inherited that identity of being an American very rapidly. I was inculcated with Americanism, you know, with the idea that as a person of European descent, I was entitled to all that. And so we can't begin to approach this unless we can get past that and understand what our common humanity is and the need to struggle together. I come to you as a member of the coalition that put this on, and so I'm coming as a member of Anti-Racist Action, which is an international network of direct action, anti-racist and anti-fascists who are trying to use direct action to confront racism and fascism, and racists and fascists. And in that capacity, I became part of something called Grassroots KPFK, which initiated this, and part then of a larger coalition of organizations and individuals that put this conference on. I'd like to acknowledge all of their hard work. I'd like to thank everyone who came out tonight, and the Southern California Library for offering us their facility, and endlessly and constantly do. I'd like to acknowledge the respect we all need to pay to the sacrifices of all the people on these shelves behind me who lived real lives and poured blood, sweat, and tears into the struggle for justice in this area that we live in. Having said that, I want to say a few things about the conference and the situation. And the first thing is that the context of a crisis of homelessness and hunger, of housing, is war. The principal cause throughout the world constantly of the dislocation of people, of the destruction of homes, is war, and it's going on constantly. And we live in a system of war because this is a colonial system, and colonialism requires war constantly and at all times. And we're all aware of some of the wars that are going on at this moment in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Libya. When I grew up and they tried to Americanize me, one of the things they had me do in the Jewish parochial school I went to was to sing the Marine hymn, which, if you may recall, goes from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And we are still waging war on the shores of Tripoli and in the halls of Montezuma. This land was once part of Mexico. Before that, it was the land of the indigenous people. Right now, in addition to the war that's being waged to hold this land, the United States is sending military aircraft. The same drones that are flying in Afghanistan are flying in Mexico, south of the imposed border, right this moment. And so that's the context that creates homelessness at home, quote unquote, in the heartland, in the homeland of the empire, inside the belly of the beast. And I come to you again as someone who has been a teacher. I just retired as a teacher in the LA schools. And what I learned about being a teacher is that a good teacher learns from and with her students and enables the students to evaluate themselves and their efforts, and the teacher evaluates herself and her efforts. One of the techniques that I used in teaching, I taught English as a second language to people from Mesoamerica, Central America, Latin America, South America, from Africa, from Asia, not to colonize their minds, but to give them the tools to confront this system. One of the techniques we used was fables, because many fables are universal and known in many different languages and cultures. One of the things I explained to my students, in the United States we call them Aesop's fables, because the Greeks got them from Ethiopia, and they called the Ethiopian Aesop, and they took those stories of cats that talk to you, and the tortoise and the hare, and the fox and the crow, and many other stories. One of the fables many people probably know is the story of the blind men and the elephant. The story of the blind men and the elephant is that several blind men are introduced to an elephant to try to understand what the elephant looks like, and one blind man holds the elephant's leg and says the elephant is like a tree trunk. Another blind man holds the elephant's tail and says the elephant is like a rope. The third blind man holds the elephant's trunk and says, no, an elephant is like a hose. Another one holds the elephant's ear and says, no, an elephant is like a fan. Another blind man holds the elephant's tusk and says, no, an elephant is like a saber. I'm not sure what the point of that parable is in the original telling of it, but there are two lessons to me in that. One is that those people were not using the totality of their senses, because if you're standing near an elephant, your nose will tell you that it's not a tree trunk or a hose, that it's a living, wild creature with an odor. It's gamey. And if the elephant passes its gas or leaves its deposit, you know that you're dealing with something very large that digests a lot of food. And so if we're confronting something, we can't just grope in the dark about it. We have to use the totality of our senses. And the other is that we have to collaborate and communicate. So one of the purposes of this conference was to say people are facing different aspects of this monster of a system that we face, and someone is dealing with homelessness, someone else is dealing with foreclosures and the bank wants their house, someone else is being driven out of an apartment because they can't afford the rents because they've been driven up by gentrification, someone else is living in Jordan Downs or Nickerson Gardens and they want to privatize the whole thing and send them up to Palmdale or out to Pomona, or they get a voucher for a housing, the only place they can get Section 8 is some other part of the county. And so we need to collectivize those experiences and understand it's not a tree trunk and a fan and a saber and a hose or a rope. It's a system that we are confronting, and we're in it together. We're facing the same system. And we have to marshal our resources and collectivize and communicate with each other and learn from the totality of our senses about what we're facing. And so the crisis of homelessness, the crisis of foreclosure, of gentrification, of the privatization of the parks and the privatization of the public housing and the crisis of Section 8 is all the same crisis. And it is the crisis of war, and it is the crisis of privatization of the land and of colonialism. And it's a crisis that can be surmounted if we combine and collaborate, if we use the totality of our efforts and our consciousness and our humanity to deal with the problem.